I'm joined today with two very important people of whom you might not have heard yet. Their story is very, very important. In particular, I'm joined now by Mr. Byun-hee Jae, who is the founder and director of a company in South Korea called Media Watch, which was founded in 2009 to monitor the mainstream media in South Korea, misleading reports about politics and various other things. And his company came to great prominence about 8 years ago in 2016, when the president at the time, Park Geun-hye, was under attack for allegations of misconduct involving a very controversial person named Choi Soon-sil. And at the time, there was a great deal of personal attack against President Park, and she was eventually impeached and found guilty and put into prison. A tremendous political
Right.
scandal in South Korea. And Mr. Byun has been following that in great detail, and he's uncovered what he believes to be some truly astonishing developments in that case. We'll get into that in just a second. And I'm also joined, to have the great honor of being joined by my colleague and friend, Kenji Yoshida. He and I have worked together on many journalistic projects. Mr. Yoshida used to work for Media Watch in South Korea, and he's been following these events very closely as well. He's fluent in the political events of South Korea, Japan, and the United States, and he's going to act as the interpreter today. So welcome to both of you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much too.
So I'll start with a big question, I guess, Mr. Byun. I should mention also that you're joining us now, I believe, from Los Angeles. We'll start with the specifics there. You're in California, and I believe, if I understand correctly, you are seeking political asylum in California. And I believe that has to do with the case at hand. Is that true? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in California right now?
지금 현재 그 캘리포니아에 계신 걸로 아는데 미국에서 그 정치 망명을 신청할 계획이라고 하시는데 그에 대해서 좀 생각을 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
그 오늘 LA 총영사관에 가서 이 윤석열 퇴진을 주장하는 대한민국 이 촛불 시위대와 함께 공정한 재판을 보장하라는 취지의 조건부 망명 선언을 했습니다. 그래서 지금 현재 제 재판에서 모든 증인과 증거들을 기각하고 아무런 더 이상의 이 심리 없이 곧바로 구속을 하려는 의도가 엿보였기 때문에 일단 저는 대한민국 법원과 정부의 공정한 재판 절차를 보장해라. 증인 증거 신청 심리를 받아들여라. 그래서 그렇게 해주면은 저는 대한민국에 들어가서 재판으로 제가 찾고 있는 진실을 입증할 자신이 있기 때문에 최소한의 그 요구를 한 거고, 만약에 그조차도 법원이 받아들이지 않는다면은 저는 미국 정부에 망명 신청을 해서 미국에서 계속 싸워 나갈 생각입니다.
So today, just today, before the Korean Council in LA, I made an announcement that if the court in South Korea doesn't hold a fair trial and approve the witnesses that I have requested prior, then I would seek a political asylum in the US. And this is a bare minimum of what I'm expecting the court to do is, and despite asking for several witnesses and some evidentiary investigation, the court tried to go straight to sentencing. So this is a sort of a conditional the condition that I'm providing. So if this doesn't get approved, I have intent to seek political asylum in the U.S.
Okay, so we've established then that Mr. Byun, that you're in the United States seeking political asylum, and I think the next question that people will want to ask is, well, why? Why is a man who has been running a media company in South Korea seeking political asylum. So we'll jump back in time to the events that set all this in motion, as far as I understand. It for viewers who are not familiar, President Park Geun-hye was the president of South Korea in the mid 2010s, and she's the president, the daughter, of course, of the former president Park Chung-hee, and to my estimation, she is a great Korean patriot, and she was run out of office over allegations that she had improperly shared state documents, I believe, and was also in a financial relationship of some sort with this lady, Choi Soon-sil. And the person who prosecuted her at the time, one of the people, was none other than Yoon Seok-yeol, who is the current president of South Korea, in one of the most remarkable political twists in modern history. The man who prosecuted the former president, Park Geun-hye, who was a very staunch conservative, later under the next president, Moon Jae-in, who was quite friendly towards North Korea, started to prosecute some of the people in Moon's circle, including Cho Kuk, for example. And then Yoon changed his stripes to become a conservative, and then he became the president after Moon Jae-in. That, as far as I understand, is the basic background. Can you tell us a little bit more, Mr. Byun, about what happened and why you think all of those events are highly suspect?
이거 좀 스토리를 내가 길게 좀 설명을 하면은,
네.
길게 설명 안 되고, 좀 이렇게, 그, 저는 처음에 이 2010년도에 JTBC의 그 태블릿 보도가 단순한 JTBC의 오보라고 봤는데, 이걸 제가 감옥 가서 계속해서 증거들을 받다 보니까 JTBC는 하수인에 불과하고 검찰과 윤석열의 특검이 주도적으로 조작했다는 증거들이 쫙 드러났습니다. 그리고 문재인 정권은 그런 윤석열을 검찰총장으로 앉히면서 저를 포함한 보수인사 200여 명을 감옥시키면서 한마디로 반대파를 다 죽이는데 이 윤석열을 문재인이 활용했고, 그 윤석열이 다시 보수로 넘어가서 이 대통령이 되는 과정에서 문재인은 끝까지 윤석열은 자신의 검찰총장이라며 사실상 이 윤석열을 지지를 해서 어, 형식상으로는 문재인에서 보수 정권으로 교체된 것처럼 보이지만은 문재인의 이 검찰총장이 정권을 잡으면서 문재인 정권의 연장이 된 거나 마찬가지입니다. 그렇게 되면서 문재인 정권 때 윤석열이 저지른 수많은 이 보수 인사를 감옥에 보낼 때, 뭐 이명박, 박근혜 등등 변희재까지 정말 수많은 조작 날조 수사들이 있었는데 그런 부분들이 지금까지 다 은폐가 되는 그런 좀 상황으로 진행이 됐습니다. 이건 이해할 수 있을까 모르겠네.
언제 그 조작 날조 수사까지 지금 다 은폐가 됐다는 거죠? 어느 조작?
응?
마지막에 그 조작 날조 수사가 다 은폐됐다는 게 어느 조작 날조 수사들이 은폐됐다는 거죠? 박근혜.
문재인 정권 당시 윤석열이 특검과 검찰 때 했던 그 대다수의
아,
수사들이 이 반대파를 죽이기 위한 조작 날조 수사인데 그 수사가 윤석열 정권에 들어서면서도 지금 다 은폐가 되고 있다는 거죠.
아. So in 2016, when JTBC first reported on this sort of Choi Soon-sil and sort of the state of manipulation scandal,
Right.
I thought this was a just simple misreporting by JTBC. But after being detained, I obtained various evidences and I investigated them, and I began to notice that JTBC was really just part of the picture, and there were bigger forces at play. And I noticed that Yoon Seok-yeol, the current president, who was the former prosecutor general,
Right.
and his team that investigated this scandal was deeply involved in this whole scheme to bring down the president.
Mm.
And as you know, he was the former prosecutor general appointed by Moon Jae-in. And
Right.
so when he was appointed as the prosecutor general by Moon Jae-in, he jailed about 200 conservative intellectuals.
Mm, mm.
So and yet, when he became the president, he again sort of turned to the conservative constituents, right? He gained the support of the conservative constituent and became a president of the Conservative Party, right?
Right.
Well, as the leader of the Conservative Party. Um, so what the viewers have to understand is that in essence, Yoon Seok-yeol is the extension of the Moon regime.
I see.
So he has covered up all the fraudulent investigation that he has conducted under Moon.
I
Because
see.
currently, even though he's the president, he's still sort of the extension of his predecessor, Moon Jae-in.
Mm. The JTBC is a news organization that was allegedly working for the Moon regime. This was part of the plot against President Park Geun-hye.
JTBC가 이제 문재인 대통령 정권하고 이제 같이 협업을 했다고 봐야 되나요? 이 스캔들에 있어서 아니면은
그랬는데 그보다는 JTBC는 그 당시에 특검, 그러니까 박근혜를 조작 수사로 죽인 그 윤석열의 특검과 JTBC가 협업을 했다고 보는 게 맞죠?
It's more
말씀드린
correct to say that the JTBC was operating with the team investigative team back then. So it was the
Investigative team.
fourth investigative team that led the investigation into the whole scandal.
Oh.
And Yoon Seok-yeol spearheaded the team.
Just for the sake of excuse me, go ahead, Mr. Byun. If you have something else.
실제로 저의 1심 선고가 나오기 한 열흘 전에 JTBC의 홍석현 회장과 그 당시 중앙지검장인 윤석열이 만난 적이 있고, 그 둘이 만난 다음에 제가 명예훼손으로 대한민국 최고였던 구형 5년을 선고받습니다. 구형 5년을 선고받아요. 예.
So there was an incident, for instance, 10 days before my sentencing for the first trial. 10 days before the sentencing, the head of JTBC, Hong Seok-hyun, and then Prosecutor General Yoon Seok-yeol met with each other. And after that, the prosecution sought a 5-year sentencing for defamation, which is the maximum sentencing that one can get for a defamation.
Two follow-up questions for my sake and for the viewer's sake, may not be familiar. One is if Mr. Byun could speak a little bit about the tablet. I know the tablet is central to this. The allegation is that Yoon and his team fabricated damning evidence against Park Geun-hye and Choi Soon-sil on this tablet that was allegedly owned by, I believe, either Park or Che, and that this tablet was one of the foundations of the impeachment charges against Park. So if he could speak a little bit about that, and secondly, if he could speak about the legal system in South Korea, which I think many people will be surprised to learn is used. Criminal defamation here is something that might be surprising to viewers. So, for example, Mr. Yoshida and I know of a South Korean professor who was charged with criminal defamation for his scholarly work on the comfort women, other people who have worked on controversial topics who have in any way fallen afoul of the authorities. There are blacklists, people are prosecuted. The Japanese journalist Kato Tatsuya-san was prosecuted for printing something unflattering about President Park. If he could speak first about the tablet, just some details about the tablet, and second about how criminal prosecution or criminal defamation is used in South Korea to silence critics of the government.
질문이 좀 길어가지고 한번 요점
네.
짚어줘야 되겠네. 예.
우선 저기 태블릿 PC가 그 사건의 가장 핵심적인 그 증거를 이렇게 저쪽에서 이제 제출을 한 것 같은데 그 태블릿 PC가 어떻게 그 조작됐으며 그게 어떻게 증거를 그 활용하게 됐는지 그쪽 그 검사
일단
측에서.
여기서 끊어서 끊어서 알겠습니다.
네.
어, 박근혜는 대통령이고 최순실은 이 시빌리언이에요. 민간인이다 보니까 어,
음,
뇌물죄를 적용할 때 박근혜와 최순실이 둘이 공모를 해야지만 공직자로서의 뇌물죄가 성립이 되는 상황입니다. 박근혜가 개인적으로 돈을 먹은 거는 하나도 없어요. 그러니까 최순실이 삼성하고 독일에서 승마 사업을 하면서 돈을 받은 거를 박근혜와 같이 받았다고 엮어야지만 이게 뇌물죄가 성립이 되는데 최순실과 박근혜가 공모해서 삼성 돈을 먹었다는 증거가 하나도 없으니까 태블릿이라는 것을 하나 조작해서 이 태블릿으로 박근혜와 최순실이 모든 국정 기밀을 주고받았다. 이런 식으로 대중을 선동해서 실제적으로 박근혜와 최순실이 공모해서 삼성돈을 먹었다는 증거는 없지만 그냥 태블릿 하나로 그냥 확 국민들을 속여서 그냥 유죄로 끌고 나간 이렇게 된 겁니다. 이 태블릿 사건은. 먼저 이걸 끊읍시다. 예.
Okay, so Chae Soon-sil is a civilian friend of Park Geun-hye. So in order for a bribery charge to work, they have to conspire, right? Park Geun-hye has to conspire with Chae Soon-sil to have gained some sort of a bribe.
yeah.
So, but there is absolutely no evidence that Park Geun-hye received even a dime from anybody
Mm,
as a bribe. So in order to connect Park Geun-hye, what they did was Chae Soon-sil had a sort of horse riding sort of company in Germany. She
mm,
owned a sort of horse riding company. So and she received certain support from Samsung, right?
mm, right.
A company in South Korea. So what they did, what the prosecution did was they said Park was conspiring with Chae Soon-sil through this tablet PC,
Mm,
and that Chae Soon-sil had all these sort of uh, important documents, government sort of documents
mm,
available through this tablet PC. So in essence, Park Geun-hye and Chae Soon-sil were essentially one thing. They saw as one thing
mm.
receiving bribery from these major corporations from South Korea.
I see.
So that's where the tablet initially comes in.
And in that sense, Choi Sun-sil, she would be the cutout for these payments, for example, from Samsung or other big corporations in South Korea. So she in a sense, she was the go-between between the companies, and the allegation is that Park was getting money from big corporations via Choi Sun-sil. That's what the prosecution alleges.
그 검찰이 주장하는 거는 이제 최순실을 통해서 박근혜 전 대통령이 어떤 뇌물을 받았다 이런 주장을 하고 있는 건가요?
둘이 같이 공모해서 최순실이 독일에서 삼성으로부터 승마 사업을 하는 그 승마 말 관리를 하는 그 대가로 돈을 받은 거. 그러니까 최순실이 그 말 관리용으로 돈을 받은 16억과 그 딸 정유라가 그 말을 빌려 탄 것까지 모두 박근혜가 받은 거랑 똑같다. 최순실과 한마디로 박근혜는 이른바 흔히 경제 공동체. 둘이 완벽하게 돈을 나눠 쓰는 관계니까 최순실과 정유라가 받은 것도 박근혜가 받은 거랑 똑같다. 이렇게 해서 뇌물죄가 뒤집어 씌운 거예요.
So it's not that Chae Soon-sil sort of was a middleman. It was more so that they saw Park Geun-hye and Chae Soon-sil as just one whole
I
thing.
see.
So everything that Chae received, Park received. Essentially, that's how the prosecution took.
I see. So Mr. Bune alleges that the tablet that was used as one of the key pieces of evidence was doctored, that the evidence was not there. It was placed there by the prosecution team so that they were set up. They were framed for this alleged crime that they didn't commit. I think, unfortunately, many people watching in the United States will understand this very well, as the American government is now prosecuting or using lawfare to go against political enemies. It's not unfamiliar at all in the United States. I think maybe the difference would be that in Korea, there's something called criminal defamation, which can be used in lawfare. If Mr. Byun could talk about that a little bit, how this criminal defamation charge has been used in South Korea, especially to silence critics of the government from the left and the right. It seems to be applied in both directions, in my understanding.
네, 아마 그 미국에 계신 분들도 이 사법 제도를 이용해 가지고 이 어떤 그 제재를 가하거나 이런 거에 대해서는 아마 크게 놀라진 않을 것 같아요. 미국에서도 충분히 있는 일인데 한국 같은 경우에는 이제 형사 명예훼손죄가 있는데 이거에 특히 이제 정부를 비판하는 사람들을 이 형사 명예훼손죄를 활용해 가지고 어떤 좀 주장을 못하게 하거나 그런 어떤 그렇게 어떤 활용을 하는데 그 형사 명예훼손죄에 대해서 조금 좀 변 대표님의 의견을 듣고
아,
싶은데요.
제가 2018년 5월에 이 사전 구속됐을 때 그 당시에 대한민국의 명예훼손으로 기소된 사람들이 약 한 2만 명. 그 2만 명 중에 딱 3명만 사전 구속됐는데 현직 언론인은 제가 유일합니다. 건국 이래 대한민국에서 유일해요. 그래서 미국은 명예훼손죄가 없기 때문에 아마 상황은 다르지만은 대한민국이 형사법에 명예훼손죄가 있었다 하더라도 어 그걸 이용해서 언론인을 감옥에 집어넣어서 자신의 범죄. 그러니까 제가 구속될 때 윤석열이 중앙지검장이고 제가 윤석열의 이 중앙지검에 구속됐기 때문에 자신의 범죄를 감추기 위해서 현직 언론인을 재판 없이 감옥에 보낸 그런 사례는 대한민국에서도 최초였고 아까 말한 대로 2만 명 정도 명예훼손 기소됐는데 딱 3명 안에 제가 들었다. 현직 언론인은 저 한 명이고 그래서 아주 드문 케이스였다. 그 당시.
So when he was indicted back in 2018, there were about 20,000 people who were indicted under criminal defamation. But there were three, including Pyun, three people who were detained by this criminal defamation. And he is probably the first journalist
Wow.
that was detained for criminal defamation, even without a trial. So, and Bjorn understands that in the U.S. there is also, a legal, like you said, lawfare, using these legal systems to silence dissidents and so on. But it's probably rare that uh, so back when Bjorn was indicted, the prosecutor general was Yoon Seok-yeol. So in essence, he was indicted by Yoon Seok-yeol. So it probably rare in the US where the prosecutor general tries to cover up his, misconducts and silence a journalist and put journalists in jail.
It's quite frightening. That it reminds me, since he's in California, there was a case maybe a little less than 10 years ago. This is unrelated to the present discussion, but the prosecutor, the state prosecutor in California at the time did prosecute two journalists. I think it was the first time in California history, prosecuted two journalists for uncovering some very unsavory things that were going on with some civil rights issues. And the state prosecutor at the time was none other than Kamala Harris. So it does happen. It's just that it's very rare to use defamation as the pretense. So I think go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
한 10년 전에 그 캘리포니아주에서도 그 지검장 캘리포니아 주 지검장이 두 명의 언론인을 이렇게 기소를 한 사건이 있었는데 그때 지검장이 아마 이제 지금 대통령 후보로 나온 카말라 헬리스
헬리스.
같다고.
Ah, yeah. So it happens. It just seems that the details are a little different. And 2,000 people is simply beyond anything that I can imagine.
I think it was 20,000.
Oh, 20,000, excuse me,
Yeah,
20,000 is just beyond anything I can.
yeah.
So it's so we'll take another step back here and try to explain to viewers what's going on in the big picture politically here. So you've got Park Geun-hye, who again I see as a patriot, as someone who is personally invested in making South Korea a strong, prosperous, free, democratic country, keeping it that way. Her father, of course, was one of my favorite politicians of all time, Park Chung-hee. He was, in my opinion, a great man. He saved the Republic of Korea from almost certain communist infiltration from the north. So she comes from that line of Korean patriots. Opposed to them would be Moon Jae-in, who maybe is a representative of this 386 generation, perhaps, or of the people in South Korea who are friendly to the North, who believe in unification, North and South, perhaps on the North's terms. Is it fair to say that if Yoon Seok-yeol was acting on behalf of Moon Jae-in, if the mastermind of all this against the plot against Park Geun-hye is Moon Jae-in, is it fair to say that the end game, as Moon saw it, was turning South Korea into a North-friendly country? Was that the whole idea of this thing, was to take out Park Geun-hye, take out the conservatives, and clear the way for reunification with the North? Was that the end goal here?
박근혜 대통령을 이제 탄핵시키는 어떤 주 목적이란 것이 과연 어떤 부분에 그 목적이 있다고 보시나요?
그러니까 그 당시 박근혜 대통령의 임기가 1년밖에 안 남았었고, 사실 박 대통령의 인기가 많이 떨어져서 자연스럽게 문재인으로 정권 교체가 될 수 있었던 흐름인데, 그런데 그거를 무리하게 억지로 탄핵을 시키는 과정에서 대한민국 사회에서 검찰 권력이 폭증을 했다. 그러니까 저는 탄핵을 무리하게 추진을 밀고 들어간 세력은 문재인이라기보다는 검찰 세력과 손잡았던 JTBC, 실제로 그 탄핵으로 인해서 JTBC의 정치적 영향력이 엄청나게 올라갔고 검사들의 정치 권력이 엄청나게 세지면서 결국에는 문재인 다음으로 검찰 정권이 들어섰다는 겁니다. 그래서 저는 박근혜를 교체해서 뭘 하겠다는 것보다도 검찰과 그 JTBC의 권력욕에 의해서 임기 1년밖에 안 남았던 박근혜를 무리하게 탄핵 들어갔다고.
So when Park was impeached, she only had about 1 year left in her term. So
Right.
and her approval rating was dropping quite a bit. So it was naturally the her successor was Moon Jae-in anyways,
Right.
right? So it was a very a desperate sort of, or maybe an attempt to bring down the president that caused all this, right? So
Right.
it sort of snowballed into this whole big scandal.
Hmm.
And so I don't think it's necessarily that that Moon, it was a scheme to bring Moon as the next president.
Hmm.
It was more so their rushed attempt to impeach Park that caused all this trouble. And the central to this whole impeachment and the whole scandal is, of course, JTBC and the prosecution.
Hmm.
And after the impeachment of Park Geun-hye indeed, these two gained tremendous amount of power, both
Mm.
JTBC and the Korean prosecution.
Right.
And what happened was after Moon Jae-in, it's Yoon Seok-yeol, but Yoon Seok-yeol is essentially a president who is a former prosecutor and a sort of a prosecutorial state it has become
Prosecutorial
right now.
state. Interesting. It's very interesting. So this gets to my big question, I think, for Mr. Byun is about Yoon Seok-yeol. And I'm not sure so in my impression, I agree that Yoon Seok-yeol has changed his stripes, and I also join Mr. Byun in doubting his, I guess you could say, his conservative bona fides. I wonder though, so this notion of a prosecutorial state clears up a lot for me then. It makes a lot of sense. So I had been thinking of this tablet incident as being masterminded by Moon, and Yoon was uh his pawn, and then Yoon turned against Moon and became the political Machiavellian wizard of South Korea, which makes Yoon Seok-yeol one of the greatest political geniuses in the 21st century. And I didn't see how that squared with Yoon Seok-yeol's public image as being not particularly apt. I mean, as being not the greatest political genius in the world. So what I think Mr. Byun is saying is, in a much more general sense, the prosecution has formed a kind of trans-party, trans-political maybe dictatorship, or that the prosecutorial state makes a lot of sense to me now. So it's not that Yoon is the mastermind, it's that the prosecution has overtaken the executive branch and become a kind of de facto permanent executive branch of government. Is that fair to say? Is that what's going on here? And JTBC is just following the political trend and propping up the people in power?
그 윤석열 대통령이 어떤 정치적 성향이 확실하지 않은 거는 알겠는데, 이게 그 박근혜 정권 당시에 그 탄핵을, 그러니까 그 아마 이 보시는 사람들이 이해하기가 좀 어려운 부분이, 그 박근혜 정권 하에서 이 수사가 다 이루어지고 검찰들에 의해서 이런 어떤 밴 대표님 주장하시는 조작 날조 수사가 다 이루어지고 탄핵도 이루어졌는데, 그 어떤 중심적인 역할이라는 누가 이걸 다 주동해서 이렇게 했는지가 아마도 좀 궁금하신 것 같은데요.
아니, 박근혜 정권의 검찰이 수사를 한 달 정도 하고, 검찰이 한 달 정도 하면서 박근혜에 대한 뇌물죄를 명시를 하지 못했어요. 그래서 특검이 시작되고 윤석열이 특검 제4팀장으로 들어오면서, 실제 윤석열이 특검 제4팀 들어오기 전에 어떤 기자와의 전화 통화를 통해서 박근혜를 뇌물로 자기는 잡아넣을 수 있다, 이런 말을 했듯이, 박근혜 쪽 검찰이 못 건드렸던 박근혜의 뇌물죄를 누명 덮어 씌웠던 것은 윤석열이 특검이 들어온 다음부터입니다.
특검이 꾸려진 것도 박근혜 정권 하에서 꾸려진 게 맞나요?
근데 특검이라는 것은 어쨌든 박근혜 정권을 하나 하더라도 탄핵을 추진한 야당만이 임명한 특별검사였기 때문에, 야당의 이해관계, 탄핵을 추진하는데 가장 적합하게 수사를, 뇌물죄를 뒤집어 씌울 수 있을 사람은 윤석열을 선택한 거고, 윤석열이 그 탄핵을 추진하는 야당의 입장을 100% 대변해 준 거예요.
So I think it's important to understand that this whole investigation into Park Geun-hye's scandal occurred under Park Geun-hye's regime. So and this investigation, and it sort of continued on after Moon took over, but
Right.
it started when Park was
Right.
still the president,
Right.
right? So um, about a month, there was an investigation for about a month during the Park administration to prosecute her with bribery, but it was
Mm,
unsuccessful. And what happened was a special prosecution team was created
right.
after, because it was essentially impossible to prosecute her.
Because there was no
So a
evidence.
special investigation,
It was
right,
impossible
right,
because there was nothing. They found nothing.
right.
Okay, all right.
And then the special prosecution team was created, and um, so the party that sort of oversees this special prosecution team is, of course, the opposition party. Then, so
Right.
the Democratic Party, right? And there's also evidence where the then prosecutor general or then team leader of this special prosecution team, Yoon Seok-yeol, who he speaks with this journalist about how he would be able to indict Park on bribery
Mm,
charges.
mm.
So he was pretty confident, Yoon
Right.
Seok-yeol, then that he could prosecute Park Geun-hye.
Who is this man, Yoon Seok-yeol? I mean, he comes out of nowhere. He becomes a special prosecutor. He gains extraordinary fame, political fame, among the left because he took out Park Geun-hye. And then he changes horses midstream and becomes a conservative and runs as a conservative. Mr. Bune, I think I might share your befuddlement, your amazement at the conservative voters in South Korea who apparently accepted this as something not to be troubled over. In other words, you have a man who took out one of the strongest conservatives in South Korea, and then he declares himself to be a member of the conservatives, and he runs for president and he wins. Do the South Korean conservatives accept all this, or is there a great deal of suspicion amongst South Korean conservatives that this man Yoon Song-yeol is maybe not who we think he is?
어, 그 윤석열 대통령이 어떤 인물인지에 대해서 좀 질문을 드리고 싶은데, 원래 이제 좌파 진영의 지지를 받고 문재인 정권 하에서 이제 검찰총장이 돼서 보수 인사들을 탄압을 하고, 그 이후에 다시 보수 진영으로 넘어와서 대통령이 되고, 이런 거에 대해서 어떤 일반 국민들은 변 대표님이 갖고 있는 어떤 의심이나 이런 좀 잘못됐다는 그걸 공감대가 형성이 돼 있나요?
아, difficult
음,
problem인데,
음,
그러니까 윤석열이 문재인 정권의 검찰총장으로 보수 인사 200명을 감옥에 집어넣는데 어떻게 이 사람이 보수 진영의 지지를 받아서 보수 대통령이 될 수 있냐? 저는 이거는 이 아웃 오브 센스, 이건 상식적으로는 도저히 이거는 있을 수 없는 일인데, 박근혜 탄핵으로 인해서 보수 200명이 감옥 갔다는 얘기는 거의 인재들이 거의 초토화됐다는 얘기입니다. 예. 그래서 보수에서 활동했던 사람들이 거의 다 이 검찰에 걸려 들어가서 완전히 인재풀이 초토화된 상황에서 이 보수 진영에서는 그래도 이 윤석열이 보수 진영으로 왔으니까 보수의 대통령이 되면은 문재인을 감옥에 집어넣고 그 대권 주자인 이재명을 감옥에 집어넣을 수 있는 그런 정치적인 보복은 해줄 수 있지 않겠냐.
음,
그런 그 기대감으로 어쩔 수 없이 윤석열을 지지를 했다고 보고 있고, 그래서 사실은 이 보수층의 기대와 달리 아직까지 윤석열은 아직 문재인을 감옥에 못 집어넣고 이재명도 못 집어넣고 이러면서 현재는 보수층의 지지도 거의 절반 이상 지금 이제 떨어져 나간. 그래서 잘못 선택했구나 이 보수에서 그런 사람들이 지금 절반이 넘어서고 있는 상황이죠.
음.
어렵다. 이건 진짜 한국 사람한테 설명하라 그래도 쉽지 않네요.
So this is very confusing. I can understand. And like you said, Yoon Seok-yeol was, of course, he rose to the prosecutor general position under the liberal regime, Moon Jae-in,
Right.
and then he flips side to the conservative to become the president, right?
Right.
So what happened was when he prosecuted about 200 conservative intellectuals and politicians, there were no longer really a viable candidate in the conservative turf
I see.
to pitch for president. So, and they thought that because of his background as prosecutor, that once Yoon becomes the president, that he was the right person to sort of exact revenge on Moon Jae-in and Moon Jae-in's sort of successor, Lee Jae-myung,
Lee
right, who is
Jae-myung,
the
yeah.
current leader of the Democratic Party. Um, so they believe the conservative constituents, most of them believe that this was possible if Yoon Suk-yeol became the president. But as you see now, he hasn't been able to indict and put Moon Jae-in or Lee Jae-myung in jail.
Right.
So if you look at the approval rating right now against on Yoon Suk-yeol, it halved than where he started. So
Mm.
the conservative voters in Korea are recognizing that he's no longer able uh, to sort of complete that sort of mission.
Two quick follow-up questions on this line here. Number one, if Yoon Seok-yeol took out all of his potential rivals by prosecuting them, leaving only himself as the only viable candidate, that makes him one of the most Machiavellian geniuses in modern history. And number two, if he were to prosecute Moon Jae-in, for example, what would the charge be? What do you think would be the most uh, plausible charge against Moon Jae-in, legally speaking, if he were to prosecute him?
만약에 윤석열 대통령이 본인의 어떤 정치적인 적들을 다 이제 기소를 하고 그렇게 된다면 아마 굉장히 마키아벨리 같은 그런 인물이 될 것 같은데 문재인 전 대통령을 만약에 기소를 한다면 어떤 수사를 통해서 기소를 할 거라고 생각하시나요?
지금 전주지검에서 이 문재인과 그 딸의 이 뇌물죄 수사를 해서 아마 기소가 들어가려는 것 같은데, 저는 이게 단순히 이 윤석열 개인의 이 의지로 문재인을 수사하는 게 아니고, 이 한국 검찰계가, 자, 윤석열과 한동훈이 조국을 수사하면서 문재인 정권 때, 그리고 박근혜 수사를 하면서 대통령까지 올라갔기 때문에, 지금 대한민국 검찰계는 나도 한번 거물급을 수사해서 한번 떠서 권력을 잡겠다 이런 생각이 팽배합니다. 그래서 전주지검에서는 지금 이 윤석열의 의지와 관계없이 문재인을 잡아서 자기도 검찰 영웅이 돼서 한번 권력 잡고 싶다 이런 사람들이 있는 거고, 이 다른 쪽에서는 이제 어느 순간 김건희를 수사해서 잡아넣어서 영웅 되겠다. 그러니까 이 검찰 스스로 권력화돼서 아마 이제 내년쯤 되면은 여기저기서 막 검찰이 윤석열이 통제가 안 되는 상황에서 막 수사를 막 할 그런 분위기입니다.
So, if you take a look at Jeonju District Prosecution's Office right now, they're investigating Moon Jae-in and her daughter Moon Dae's bribery, potential bribery allegations. Um, but Byun doesn't think that this whole investigation into Moon and Moon's daughter is a just solely Yoon Suk-yeol, his decision alone.
Hmm.
Because if you take a look at the current situation, they've seen how Yoon rose to presidency, right? Through
Right.
these sort of high-profile investigation into Choguk, the former President Park Geun-hye.
Right.
So they now are seeing that this might be their chance to rise to stardom, right? Rise
Right.
to higher up position. So what's happening now is that prosecution is becoming far more autonomous sort of entity, and
Interesting.
they're conducting their own sort of investigation into whatever that could really bring these prosecutors to higher up positions like Yoon Seok-yeol.
This is really interesting what Mr. Bune is saying about the prosecutorial state. I think it makes a lot of sense. Just one very quick question about Moon Jae-in and his daughter being prosecuted for bribery or investigated. The bribery is political bribery, or it's just good old-fashioned money bribery with no political strings attached.
지금 현재 그 문재인 전 대통령한테 가해진 그 수사, 그 뇌물 수사 같은 경우에는 어떤 뇌물죄가 적용이 돼 있는 건가요?
어, 박근혜한테 적용한 거랑 거의 유사한데, 문재인 딸과 문재인 사위한테 이 이스타 항공이라는 그 회사가 취업을 시켜주고 약 2억 원의 생활비를 지원해주고, 문재인은 그 이스타 항공의 회장 이상직을 중소기업청 중진공이라고 이걸 중소기업진흥공단 이사장으로 시켜주고 비례대표 국회의원 시켜주고, 한마디로 이상직의 회사로부터 문재인 사위와 부부가 생활비를 받아 쓰고 문재인은 그 대가로 이 관직을 주는, 그래서 뇌물죄 플러스 거의 이제 이 외관 매직 뭐이 혐의가 걸려 들어 있는데, 어 박근혜 혐의와 비교하면은 이거는 뇌물죄로 처벌받을 확률이 훨씬 높아요. 그러니까 범죄 혐의가 훨씬 짙다. 박근혜에게 적용한 뇌물죄와 비교해 보면은. 안 들리나?
So if you take a look at the current investigation, the main investigation into Moon and his daughter is that um, Moon Jae-in's daughter and her husband um, received some sort of a treatment from this Eastern airline, this company called Eastern Airline. So they've been receiving allegedly Moon Jae-in's daughter and her husband had been receiving about 200 million won
Hmm.
from this airline, and I believe Moon Jae-in's daughter's husband was also hired by the company.
Hmm.
And in return, Moon Jae-in Moon Jae-in helped the head of the Eastern Airline um, to obtain a position in a government sort of government what do you say sort of a government, so part of the governmental institution,
Oh.
and also to become a politician. So Moon Jae-in helped the president do all that in return.
Oh.
But if you compare with Park Geun-hye, 박근혜 정권 수사하고 비교하면은 문재인 정권 때가 훨씬 그
왜냐면 문재인 사례가 문재인은 그러니까 박근혜는 최순실과 정유라가 삼성으로부터 거래하는 거를 전혀 알지 못했던 상황이었는데 만에 문재인은 자기 부부가 이스타항공으로서 돈 받는 걸 뻔히 알고 그 회장한테 이 관직을 줬기 때문에 뇌물죄 혐의가 훨씬 더 정확하죠. 문재인한테 적용된 게.
if you compare this to, say, Park Geun-hye's bribery charges, this Moon Jae-in's case is far more clear because Moon actually knew of these things taking place. And so he knew that her daughter and her son-in-law was receiving this sort of special treatment from the airline. And in return, Moon Jae-in helped the president of this company, with gaining some role in the government institution. But Park Geun-hye was unaware of, Choi Soon-sil's business with
Right.
Samsung. So
And Eastern Airlines, this is a South Korean company.
이스타 항공이
그래서 맞아요. 네, 사우스 코리아 컴퍼니.
South Korean company.
네, 한국 컴퍼니. 네.
And I think we should also point out, and maybe Kenji, you can talk a little bit about this as well, is that Yoon, the president, his wife is under fire for some allegedly for accepting a handbag and so forth, for accepting some gifts from people. Perhaps a quid pro quo was in place. We're not sure. But Yoon himself is also not 100% clean in all of this, at least as far as his family is concerned. There were allegations, I think, with a import company, a car import company. If you could just talk a little bit about that for the viewers.
어, 아마 윤석열 대통령에 대해서도 그 여러 수사라 그럴까요? 그 어떤 논란이 많지만은 김건희 여사에 대해서 논란이 많은 걸로 알고 있는데 도이치모터스 그 주가 조작 그리고 또 이전에 뇌물수수 혐의도 있는 걸로 아는데 여기에 대해서 조금 변 대표님의 생각을
음. 도이치모터스 주가 조작은 뭐 거의 확정이 됐다고 봐야 되고, 뭐 뇌물, 뭐 배임 횡령죄도 뭐 거의 감사 결과로 보면은 검찰이 수사만 하면 뭐 바로 드러날 정도인데, 아마도 올해 이재명 문재인이 아마 수사들이 이제 뭐 정리가 되고 재판 결과가 내년 정도 넘어가면은 어느 검사팀이든 자기들이 한번 자기들이 뜨기 위해서 김건희 수사를 확 들어갈 가능성은 아주 높습니다.
If you take a look at the Deutsche Motors,
Right.
the stock manipulation charges against Kim Gun-hee, this is pretty. The evidence is quite clear on this, so there is really no doubt that
That she
the
did it.
prosecuting right, the
Right.
Deutsche Motor case is pretty clear, and there's also bribery charges, as you know, against Kim Gun-hee, and breach of trust case against her. Um, it seems like the investigation, there isn't a sort of new development now on the investigations, but Hyun thinks that around next year, this whole thing would sort of really come to a more intense investigation. And Byun also talked a little bit earlier about how individual prosecutors are trying to gain this opportunity to rise to a better position by trying these high profile cases. So this may be sort of the case that uh, many prosecutors will want to use as their sort of stepping stone to.
What's the future of South Korean politics? You've got now this emerging, it would seem, prosecutorial state. This has come up several times in our conversation, where the prosecutor aims for a high-profile case to make a name for himself, and then he jumps into the political ring. It would seem that the prosecutors are taking over. The prosecution bench has become the platform for entering big political office in South Korea. But surely South Korean voters know what's going on, and especially with the tablet issue. I mean, Mr. Byun and Media Watch, they've been working tirelessly to get this story out. People must know that the tablet issue is highly suspicious, that there's at least a very good chance that the prosecution did in fact frame Park Geun-hye with this phony tablet evidence that was doctored and so forth. Are South Korean voters, I mean, left and right or undecided, doesn't matter, but South Korean voters must look at this and be very angry to see the prosecution being turned into a political springboard, and also to see the prosecution, at least what it seems to me, falsifying evidence against a sitting president to take her out. Are the South Korean voters angry? Are they up in arms about this?
어, 이 지금 그 전 대표님께서 이제 한국이 그 검찰 정권 이 되어가고 있다. 지금 현재 정권이 검찰 정권으로 되어가고 있고 또 태블릿이라는 이 그 조작되었다는 이 태블릿을 통해서 현직 대통령을 탄핵을 하고 그 자리에서 끌어내렸는데 이 한국에 있는 유권자들은 이 현재 그 검찰 정권 그리고 이 태블릿 사태에 대해서 이 분노를 안 느끼나요?
아, 음, 지금 이 민주당 지지자, 그러니까 박근혜 탄핵 때 촛불을 들고 박근혜 탄핵을 찬성했던 현재 이 야당 지지자들은 태블릿이 조작됐다 그러면은 그 당시 우리가 이 촛불이라는 게 거짓이 아니냐 이런 두려움 때문에 이거를 잘 관심을 갖기 싫어하고 그리고 이 박근혜 탄핵 때만 하더라도 탄핵이 잘못됐다고 저랑 같이 태극기 들고 탄핵 반대 운동했던 보수들은 윤석열을 대통령을 만들어 놓으니까 이 태블릿 조작이 드러나면은 윤석열이 끌려 내려오는 게 두려우니까 이걸 또 어, 이슈하기 꺼려하고 이렇게 딱 걸려 있어서 제가 이 미국의 망명을 오게 된 또 계기가 되기도 했는데 현재 윤석열의 지지율이 거의 한 15%대까지 무너져 가고 있기 때문에 어차피 보수에서는 더 이상 윤석열을 지킬 수가 없다. 이거는 뭐, 아직 임기 3년 남았는데, 3년 동안 윤석열과 같이 가봐야 정권 뺏기고 뭐, 방법이 없다. 이런 판단을 아마 연말 안에 보수가 판단을 하게 될 거고, 그렇게 되면은 어차피 윤석열은 이제 끌려 내려올 바에야, 어, 보수 쪽이 원래부터 이 문제를 삼았던 태블릿 조작건을 이슈를 시켜서 끌어내리는 게 그나마 윤석열 정권의 이 실패를 이 촛불 진보와 나눠 가질 수가 있는 유일한 방법이거든요. 윤석열이 집권에서 저지른 실정만으로 윤석열이 끌려 내려오면은 이건 보수가 다 책임져야 되는데 거기에 윤석열의 태블릿 조작 범죄가 들어가면은 진보 좌파한테도 책임을 물을 수가 있으니까 그래서 연말 안에는 결국 보수가 윤석열을 포기하고 태블릿 조작 이슈를 제기를 할 거라 저는 그렇게 믿고 있습니다. 예.
이 태블릿 관련해 가지고 만약 이것도 이제 일부 포함시켜서 끌어내리면은 이제 그 좌파 쪽도 연루돼 있어서 그런 건가요? 그쪽에도 이제 책임을 물을 수 있다는 거는.
태블릿 조작건에 대해서는 어, 지금까지 뭐 JTBC와 검찰이 주도했지만 좌파 언론인 한겨레, 경향, MBC도 지금 이 시간까지도 이 태블릿 조작에 대해서는 은폐하고 윤석열을 비호하고 있거든요.
음.
그래서 이 범죄가 드러나면은 좌파 쪽 책임이 훨씬 크죠. 보수보다.
So, if you take the current situation in Korea, so let's see, the uh, the current liberals
Mm,
in South Korea obviously support bringing down Yoon Seok-yeol,
right,
and they are holding these rallies to, calling for his impeachment.
right.
Um,
This is the
but
Minjudang that Mr. Byun mentioned,
right,
Minjudang, the Democratic
yeah,
Party, or just the liberals in general?
Minjudang along with the general
The
population,
general
general
population.
voters.
All right.
Yeah. But with the tablet issue, still there is among the sort of the politicians within the Democratic Party, there is a difficulty to fully support this tablet issue because,
Mm,
there's obviously a suspicion of whether this is actually true or not.
right.
Um, if you take a look at the conservatives, though, so they were initially supporting Bjorn's cause, right? These conservative voters were supporting Bjorn on the tablet issue, but once Yoon became the president, they turned their backs
Mm,
on Bjorn
mm,
because this was a serious, egregious crime. So once this was raised, then Yoon would be his position as a president will be threatened. So
right.
they stopped joining hands with Bjorn. So that's part of the reason why Bjorn traveled to the US because in Korea there's really there's no media that's willing to cover this issue.
Mm,
So that's why he traveled to the US to
interesting.
raise awareness at sort of a global level. But the current approval rating of Yoon Suk-yeol is about around 15% at most. And he still has about 3 years left in his
Mm,
term. So Byun believes that in order to bring down Yoon
mm,
before his term ends, the conservatives would have to come back to this tablet issue, right?
right.
because if the conservatives, so if Yoon Seok-yeol is brought down just because his performance was bad as president and just
Right.
because of the allegations that arose after he became president, then all the fault would be on the conservatives,
Right.
right?
Right.
The conservative voters would essentially have to sort of take responsibility for everything because it's essentially Yoon's performance that was the issue. But if
Right.
the tablet issue is part of the reason why he's dragged down from the presidency, then there's also fall on the left as well,
Right.
because the left media, even to this day, claims that the tablet um, is true, that the whole tablet scandal and Park Geun-hye scandal was actually true.
Right.
So Hyun believes that there needs to be some change among the conservative voters.
This is an interesting question. I mean, in one sense, I understand, I think, the position of the conservatives that we have somebody in power now, so we don't want to take out the person who would be our own guy. But the question then becomes, it circles back, I think, to this question of who is Yoon Seok-yeol? Is he really a conservative? Did he really have a political change of heart? Is he just an opportunist? Does he have any political philosophy at all, or is he simply out for power? What kind of a person is this Yoon Seok-yeol?
아까 네.
윤석열은 그 보수주의자도 아니고, 좌파도 아니고, 레프트도 아니고, 라이트도 아니고, 오직 검찰 권력을 이용해서 이 조작날조 수사로 자신의 권력을 위해서라면 뭐든지 하는 그런, 아까 아퍼추너티,
Opportunist.
기회주의자, 권력형 기회주의자가 정확한 정체성으로 보고 있습니다.
Mm.
I think Byun just right now said he's an opportunist.
Oh,
That he would essentially, he's not left, he's not right. He would essentially use the prosecutorial power
interesting.
to pretty much do whatever he wants
Oh.
and take opportunity.
One thing I also wanted to ask about was Yoon's relationship with Park Geun-hye. My understanding is that Park Geun-hye and Yoon may be communicating perhaps behind the scenes. And I believe that Park Geun-hye is no longer in prison, if I understand correctly, that she was released on a medical condition, that she's battling some
Um,
diseases. Is that correct?
she
She's back
was
in prison.
uh
음.
yeah, she was pardoned.
She was pardoned eventually. Okay, so she's out of prison. She's no longer threatened with being put back in prison. So she's reached out with to Yoon, I understand. What's going on behind the scenes there with Yoon and Park Geun-hye?
일단 박근혜는 지금 외면적으로 보더라도 그 건강이 많이 안 좋아졌다. 감옥에 5년 동안 투옥되면서 건강이 많이 안 좋아졌고, 이 검찰이 거의 박근혜에 대한 모든 그 수사를 다 해버렸기 때문에 검찰에 의해서 약점도 좀 많이 잡혀 있는 상태여서 적당히 윤석열 정권 하에서는 이 윤석열과 이렇게 좀 맞춰가면서 그냥 이렇게 지내가는, 그래서 윤석열과 싸울 수 있는 그런 정신적, 육체적 그런 상황이 아닌 걸로 저는 판단하고 있습니다.
So Park Geun-hye was in jail for about 5 years.
Mm,
So her health is in very poor condition right now.
mm,
And when the prosecution investigated Park, they pretty much investigated everything, right? Everything
mm,
about Park. So there must be some weakness that Park has,
mm.
that so she's not in any position to really fight back against this sort of the prosecutorial power.
What about Moon Jae-in? You said he and his daughter are under investigation. Is there a future in politics for any of Moon's former, say, lieutenants, such as for example, Cho Kook or Lee Jae-myung? Is there anybody in Yoon's former camp who can rise up and bear the liberal standard back to the Blue House in South Korea?
어, 문재인은 윤석열의 범죄를 아마 다 파악하고 있을 거기 때문에 문재인은 마음만 먹으면 윤석열을 무너뜨릴 수 있는데 지금 문재인을 수사하는 것은 윤석열 자체가 아니라 밑에서 자기들도 출세하고 싶어하는 밑에 검사들이기 때문에 문재인은 지금 검사들에게 쫓기는 신세예요. 그리고 그 뇌물죄 혐의가 박근혜에 비해서 너무 명확해서 뭐 현재로서는 뭐 구속이 뭐 거의 확실시 돼서 그 상태에서 문재인이 윤석열하고 싸우기는 쉽지 않지 않을까 그렇게 보고 있습니다.
음.
혹시 그 예를 들어서 조국이나 이재명에 관련해서는 그쪽에서는 어떻게 싸울 수는 없나요?
어, 조국은 지금 대법원 판결만 나오면은 바로 감옥행이고 현재 조국은 아마 10월 달 안에 대법원 판결 나온다고 보기 때문에 조국은 뭐 거의 정치생명이 좀 위험한 상태고 이재명도 11월 달에 선고가 정치활동의 금지 수준의 당선 무효형이 될 게 확실시돼서 이재명도 쉽지가 않고 그래서 그런 이 정치인들의 힘으로 윤석열이 끌려 내려온 거는 아닐 것 같고 어, 윤석열 지지율이 그냥 폭락하면서 지지율이 완전히 폭락하면서 보수 진영에서 윤석열을 버리고 대안을 찾는 과정에서 윤석열이 끌려 내려올 것 같다는 생각을 해요.
So if you take a look at Moon right now, we talked a little bit about how he is currently being investigated
Right.
for bribery. And as Bjorn mentioned, the bribery charges are pretty evident and pretty clear. So it's highly likely that he would get prosecuted and
Mm.
indicted
Mm.
on this. And but the problem is it's not Yoon that's spearheading this sort of investigation at this point. It's the opportunist prosecutors that
Ah,
are doing this. So they're not really under control of Yoon.
I see.
And Choguk is also facing his legal challenges as well.
Right.
There is a Supreme Court decision awaiting for him this month. Probably around end of this month, there will be a sentencing for him on his sort of allegations or charges. So with Lee Jae-myung as well, there's his legal challenges for Lee Jae-myung, and his trial sentencing is expected in November, and he it will make it really difficult for these politicians to work within this political realm to to bring down Yoon or do anything with the Yoon.
This is extraordinary, what Mr. Byun, what you're saying. South Korean politics has been upended. It seems that the old battles between the left and the right that I'm familiar with from my lifetime. You had a leftist president and then more of a conservative president, back and forth. All of that seems to have been swept away by this prosecutorial state, where the prosecutor now is not under the control of the Blue House, and the prosecutor has an almost sort of, I don't want to say dictatorial power, but the prosecutor seems to have gone above the presidency in some ways, become more powerful than the president, him or herself, so that the future leader of the country will not be, say, Moon's former lieutenants or Park Geun-hye's former lieutenants, but someone from within the prosecutorial office. Is that how, Mr. Byun, is that how you see the future of South Korean politics taking shape?
그 이제 한국 그 정치가 역사적으로 이렇게 보면은 좌우가 번갈아 가면서 이렇게 대통령직을 갖고 하는데 그 틀이 좀 깨진 것 같다고 말씀하시는 것 같아요. 그리고 이제
아,
검찰 공화국 때문에 그 어떤 기존의 이 정치 제도나 이 시스템 자체가 완전히 붕괴된 게 아닌가라고 말씀하십니다.
그 한국 민주화 이후에 그러니까 독재 이제 군사 정권 때는 주로 중앙정보부가 다 컨트롤하는 거를 민주화 정권 이후에 검찰을 이용해서 이 상대방을 보복하는, 그래서 좌가 잡든 누가 잡든 똑같은 일을 해오다 보니까 검찰의 권력이 엄청나게 비대화되고, 특히 문재인 때 윤석열을 이용해서 반대파들을 완전히 숙청해 버리니까 결국 이 윤석열은 아예 이 대통령까지 돼버리는 사태가 벌어져서, 지금 저하고 연대하고 있는 좌파 촛불 사람들도 뭐 송영길이나 뭐 상당히 많단 말입니다. 그래서 좌나 우나 이 상식적인 사람은, 야, 이거 계속 이 좌우가 검찰을 이용하다가 이 검찰이 완전 권력을 다 잡았네. 큰일 났네. 검찰 권력을 끌어내는 데 손을 잡고 있기 때문에, 이 부분 대해서는 저는 확신 갖고 있습니다. 윤석열은 임기를 못 채울 거다. 그리고 윤석열이 끌려 내려오면은 지금까지 민주화 이후에 있었던 아주 이 노골적인 좌우 대립 관계가 상당히 많이 좀 완화되면서 좀 새로운 정치 시대가 열릴 거라고 저는 확신하고 있습니다.
So after South Korea democratized, both left and right have been using this prosecutorial power to
Right,
silence the opponent or punish the opponent. But this was particularly sort of widely used under
right.
Moon's administration to sort of suppress the opposition. And this sort of so what Pyongyang is doing right now is like you said, this to bring down not really the opposition, but to bring down this prosecutorial state,
Right,
right?
interesting.
Not just a Yoon that attributable to Yoon per se, but just the historical, sort of prosecutorial state in South Korea. So people like Song Yong-gil, former
Right, right,
head of the Democratic Party, is
right.
also working together with Beyond to do that. And he believes after this sort of prosecutorial state has been demolished, there will be, he's more optimistic that there will be less sort of like a intense divide between left and right.
I wanted to ask about Song Yong-gil. I'm very interested in this this reshaping of South Korean politics, where before it was the left and the right. It was very easy to understand. But now, with this rise of the prosecutorial state in South Korea, you have men like Mr. Byun, and then also Song Yong-gil, who was on the former sort of left side of the spectrum, working together to bring democratic process back to South Korea. And this has nothing to do with left and right. This is an attempt to get back, I would guess, to left and right, or to get back to a sense of democratic process where the prosecutor doesn't determine everything. Mr. Byun, do you see success on the horizon? You're working with Sung Yong-gil, and I imagine there are other people on both sides of the spectrum who are against this prosecutorial state. Do you see success in turning the tide?
지금 변 대표님께서는 뭐 예를 들어서 송영길 전 대표와 같은 어떤 그 이제 좌파 진영에 있는 사람들하고도 손잡고 지금 검찰 정권을 이제 파괴하려고 하는데 혹시 가능성이 있다고 보시나요? 이 검찰 정권을 없애는.
네, 저는 뭐 100% 가능하다고 보는 게, 아까 말한 대로 윤석열 지지율이 지금 15%에서 20%밖에 안 됩니다. 그러니까 좌파든 우파든 떠나서 국정 운영을 통해서 국민이 잘 살게끔 해야 되는데 그 능력이 원천적으로 없기 때문에, 일상생활에서의 이 사람들이 이제 고통을 겪으니까, 특히 이제 의사들을 병원 늘린다고 완전히 의료 시스템이 박살이 나면서 윤석열의 주된 지지층인 노년층이 다 돌아서니까 국민들이 더 이상 버티질 못하는 상황에 와서, 그랬을 때 태블릿 PC 같은 경우는 윤석열을 끌어내릴 수 있는 명분이나 무기를 제공하는 거고, 지금 윤석열이 이 무너지는 거는 국민들이 지지를 할 수가 없는, 국민들의 신뢰와 지지가 떨어지고 있기 때문에 윤석열은 결국에는 뭐 제 생각에는 연말 정도 가면서 윤석열은 급격히 무너질 거라고 봐요.
Um, so as Björn said earlier, Yoon's approval rating is around 15-20% max.
Yeah.
So it's not really about left or right at this point. It's really about the livelihood of people that's being threatened under
Right.
Yoon, right?
Right.
Especially if you take a look at, you might know about the doctor strike
Doctor strike,
that
right.
happened, right under, and Yoon's base, sort of Yoon's the strongest supporters are elderly population, right?
Mm,
And they've been really hit hard by this doctor strike with lack of proper sort of uh, initiative from the government.
right.
So even the strongest supporter of Yoon, the elder population, is sort of turning their backs against Yoon because of his policies. So Byun believes that by the end of this year, something might happen with Yoon's presidency.
Let me let me ask a, a question about changing politics on the international stage. So we've been talking about how politics have been changing, I think, at a fundamental level in South Korea. There've been the rise of the prosecutorial state, and the the old left-right divide has been shaken up by the emergence of this very strong prosecutorial regime in South Korea, and people are rethinking the left-right divide. This has been happening, at least rethinking the left-right divide has been happening on the world stage too, as you both well know. In South Korea, for the entire post-World War II period, has been a fulcrum of the Cold War, and then of the now the divide between United States and Russia, United States and China. The American bases in South Korea are the one of the flashpoints in the world, maybe the biggest stake in the tent of the American Washington regime. Are South Koreans rethinking this as well? I mean, North Korea, I think it was the turn of this year, end of 2023 or beginning of 2024, when Kim Jong-un said that South Korea is now just an enemy state, where we've given up on unification and so forth. So that old divide between North and South Korea, and then between East and West, or the Cold War, between left and right, or communist and capitalist and so forth, all of that is being overtaken by a multipolar world. What are South Korean voters thinking? Is their future still with the United States base system, or is the international shakeup of politics affecting how people in South Korea view their own internal politics?
이 국제 문제로 조금 이 시선을 돌리고 싶은데요. 그 이제 좌우 대립이 물론 이제 한국도 그렇지만은 국제적으로도 이 좌우 대립이 굉장히 심화되고 있는데 한국에서는 이제 좌우 대립이 주로 뭐 대북 정책이나 또 주한 미군에 관해서 이 좌우 대립이 좀 형성이 되기도 하는데 혹시 그 한국에서도 앞으로 이 좌우 대립이 이 주한 미군 문제나 어, 북한 문제 관련해서 좀 영향을 줄 것으로 생각을 하시는지요?
일단 윤석열을 쉽게 얘기하면 우리가 좌우 연합으로 끌어내렸을 때 대북 관계는 이제 큰 변화가 생길 텐데 이 이른바 좌파의 그 햇볕 정책도 실패했고 이 우파의 이른바 상호주의 정책, 북한이 뭐 핵무기를 포기해야지 지원해주겠다 이것도 실패했고 양쪽 정책이 다 실패했기 때문에 아마 윤석열 정권을 좌우파가 무너뜨리고 새로운 정권이 들어서면은 좌우 그런 거 가리지 않고 이 북한과의 어떻게 김정은의 그 갖고 있는 핵무기를 제거한다거나 어떻게든 이 꽉 막혀 있는 북한 문제를 뚫기 위해서는 좌파 방식이든 우파 방식이든 수단과 방법을 가리지 않고 한마디로 실용적 접근을 하자는 흐름이 확 형성될 겁니다. 그래서 기존에는 북한을 좀 더 뭐 좀 도와주면은 이 뭐 그냥 이건 뭐 퍼주기 아니냐 막 이런 식으로 하고 북한하고의 좀 상호주의를 얘기하면은 뭐 전쟁하는 거냐 그래서 막 아예 이게 뭐 안 됐는데 좌우가 연합해서 윤석열을 끌어내리고 그 다음 정권 들어서게 되면은 좌우 이념보다는 이 북한 문제를 해결할 수 있는 이 비핵화 문제 해결할 수 있는 모든 좌파 정책이든 우파 정책이든 모든 방법을 동원하는데 크게 문제가 없는 그런 분위기가 만들어질 거라고 봐요.
혹시 그 주한 미군 관련해서는 좀 이게 정책적으로 변화가 있을까요?
주한미군은 사실은 좌파라고 해서 지금 주한미군 철수를 얘기하는 쪽은 없어요. 좌파라고 해서. 근데 문제는 트럼프 대통령이 계속 주한미군을 뺀다 그러기 때문에
음.
만약에 미국이 주한미군을 빼고 예를 들면은 이 동북아시아를 좀 다자구도로 가고 싶다. 그러니까 미국이 너무 영향력이 크다. 미군을 약간 빼는 대신에 반대로 예를 들면 뭐 러시아가 좀 역할을 한다. 그럼 우리는 그 정책에 맞게끔 변화를 해야 되는 거지. 만약에 트럼프 대통령이 주한미군을 빼니 막 줄이니 이런 부분에 대해서 우리가 계속 바짓가랑이 잡고 우리가 붙잡아야 되는 그런 건 아닌 것 같아요. 만약에 그런 흐름 온다면은 한마디로 미국 중심의 동북아가 아니라 미국이 스스로 좀 넘겨서 러시아 역할을 좀 하고 싶다 그러면 우리는 그에 맞춰서 변화할 필요가 있는 거예요.
Um, so take for instance the North Korea policy in South Korea, which certainly it divides the left and right politically. Just take a if you take a look at the North Korea policy, the left has uh, initiated well the left has initiated the sunshine policy
Right,
for a long time, but it has ultimately failed,
right,
right? And the right has been using this policy of reciprocity that
right,
if sort of quid pro quo, if you remove your nuclear facility, we will provide something.
right.
But that also sort of failed on the right as well. So the left and right, if if we're able to bring down this prosecutorial state, Byung believes that there will be a more realistic and feasible solution to North Korea issue because the left and right would have better or will be better able to cooperate with each other. Um, this is and if you take a look at the U.S. base in South Korea, there aren't really left-wing people who claim outright sort of removal of the US base in South Korea.
Interesting.
There might be some, but it's pretty rare, even among the left.
Hmm.
Um, but the problem is Trump, right? The Trump factor. If Trump comes to power and if he seeks to withdraw US base from South Korea, Byun believes that if what Trump wants is sort of more multilateral system, right?
Hmm.
That Korea not rely on just US,
Right.
then it ought to be that way. And the Korean government should prepare for a more of this multilateral structure that might be necessary should Trump become reelected. Um, yeah.
There's a shakeup in South Korean politics, which is just to clarify, there's a shakeup in South Korean politics, which is internal. I mean, these things about Yoon and Park and the prosecutorial state, these are internal political problems. And then there's a parallel shakeup in the United States with Trump, and then in East Asia with Russia and China and the multipolar world, and then throughout the world with the rise of BRICS and the global South and so forth. So in many ways, it seems like what's happening in South Korea is paralleled in other places. And of course, internationally, those two streams can converge, where South Korean politics is changing and then international politics is changing. There's a sort of echo back and forth. They're influencing back and forth, seems to me.
Right.
Okay. Well, if it's okay, I'd like to go back to something that Mr. Byun mentioned about the sunshine policy. And if I'm not mistaken, that was Kim Dae-jung, and I believe he won the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And another
Mhm.
South Korean has just won a Nobel Peace Prize, Han Kang. I wonder, the sunshine policy ended in failure, but the Nobel Committee the Peace Prize to me seems obviously political, and the Nobel Committee wanted to commend Kim Dae-jung for his sunshine policy. Han Kang, how do you read the politics of this literature prize for Han Kang? Not the Peace Prize, but the literature prize. How do you read the politics of selecting Han Kang? Is this a political statement in favor of the left in South Korea? How do you read this prize?
그 예전에 이제 햇볕 정책 같은 경우에는 실패로 돌아갔는데 그때 이제 김대중 대통령이 그걸로 인해서 노벨 평화상을 수상을 했는데요. 최근에 또 작가 한강 씨가 그 노벨 문학상을 수상을 했는데 이 수상에 대해서 좀 소감이 그러니까 어떻게 생각하시나요? 이 수상이 정치적으로 이렇게 좀 연루가 돼 있다고 봐야 되나요?
일단 헨리 키신저가 이 베트남전 종전협정을 했다 해서 노벨 평화상을 받았다가 결국 베트남 전체가 공산화되면서 노벨 평화상을 반납을 한 사례가 있는데 저는 김대중 대통령 일가한테 제가 공식적으로 제안한 적이 있어요. 좋은 뜻으로 선사인 팔러시를 했지만 결국 결과적으로 평화가 된 게 아니라 김정은이 2006년도에 핵무기를 시험하는 사태가 벌어졌기 때문에 어, 그 선샤인 팔러시를 반대했던 국민들을 설득하기 위해서라도 노벨 평화상은 반납했으면 좋겠다. 저는 그 생각은 아직도 변함이 없습니다. 지금 뭐 이어서까지 돌아가서 그랬는데 김대중 대통령 쪽에 남아있는 사람들이 저는 노벨 평화상을 반납을 해주는 게 아마 남북 관계나 국민 통합에 훨씬 좋다고 생각을 하고 어, 이번에 한강의 노벨상 수상은 아마 한국인들은 굉장히 뜻밖일 겁니다. 그러니까 우리가 익히 알고 있는 노벨 문학상 수상자들은 이미 거의 전 세계적으로 이름이 다 알려지고 다 이제 거장이 돼서 말년에 받는 게 노벨상이거든요. 그게 헤르만 헤세도 그랬었고 뭐 노벨 문학상을 거부했지만 장폴 사르트도 그랬었고 다 그런데 한강은 젊은 작가예요. 젊은 작가고 내용이 PC 좌파, PC 좌파. 이 채식주의자라는 작품도 그렇고 아주 굉장히 강한 이념적 추구하는 데서 그런 거를 동의하지 않는 한국민들은 한강이라는 작가를 아는 사람이 거의 몇 명이나 있었을 거라는 이 국민 중에 그래서 그 부분에 대해서 굉장히 의아해하고 야, 그럼 노벨상이 원래 뭐 하는 거냐 이런 문제 제기를 하는 거는 저는 충분히 있을 수 있다고 생각합니다. 그리고 제 스스로도 오바마가 노벨 평화상 탔을 때하고 2016년도 밥 딜런이 노벨 문학상 받았을 때 굉장히 이상하게 생각했었거든요. 그러니까 이제 이
음,
시대가 하나의 상으로 전 이 국민들이나 이걸 다 포괄을 못한다. 상이라는 게 몇몇이 모여서 이렇게 주는 건데 그 생각이 다른 사람들을 어떻게 이 상을 줬다 해가지고 다 따라오게 할 수 있겠습니까? 그래서 이제 더 이상 그 노벨상에 이렇게 막 연연하는 이제 그런 시대는 지나지 않았나.
So, you talked a little bit about Kim Dae-jung, right?
mm,
And as you know, Henry Kissinger, he also received the Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating peace in the Vietnam War, but he
right,
returned his award later on because of the actual results weren't peace.
right, right,
And so Pyun also officially told Kim Dae-jung's side when he received the award that he should return, like
mm,
Henry Kissinger did. That because, as you know, Kim Dae-jung's sunshine policy ultimately, I mean, the intent was great, but ultimately failed.
right,
And it did not bring peace. In fact, it brought about a nuclear testing by the North Koreans.
right,
So he still thinks that although Kim Dae-jung is now dead, he believes that Kim Dae-jung should return. His family or someone in his family side should return the Nobel Peace Prize.
mm,
Uh, with uh, with the Hangang receiving a Nobel Prize, this was quite unexpected among the
right,
Korean population as well,
oh,
because usually Nobel Peace Prize for Literature is awarded to those whose names are quite known
Right.
internationally.
Right.
And they usually get awarded near the end of their career, right? These
Right.
big figures getting awarded like Hermann Hesse, end of their career. But
Right.
Hangang is quite unknown even within Korean population. And
Interesting.
her books are political, PC, what we call in Korea, politically correct,
Right.
left-wing, sort of ideologically driven
Right.
books. Even her most popular, The Vegetarian, I think,
Right. Right. The vegetable,
is
the vegetarian. Right. Right. Right.
right. That book is quite ideologically driven book. So unless you're really into that type of book in Korea, people aren't familiar with this person, even within South Korea.
Interesting.
Right. So it's quite very unexpected. And so Byung believes that, it's sort of a trend, I guess, with Obama receiving Nobel Peace Prize, um, and Bob Dylan receiving Peace Prize. It's become sort of this, the prestige is no longer there, right?
Right.
And
Right.
it's still a very important thing, but I think there come a time when it's about I guess it's um now in a sort of um it's a time where we should think about this Nobel Peace Prize as something different than
Hmm.
as it once was.
Interesting, including the literature prize for Dylan in Hong Kong and so forth. That just the Nobel in
Right,
general has lost its luster then.
right.
Very interesting. Final set of questions. I know it's getting
Mhm.
late out there, and I really appreciate your time. I'm interested in Mr. Byun's his future, and I'm praying very much for his release, that all of this goes away, or that he can obtain asylum in the United States. I wonder, two related questions. One is, he's in Los Angeles right now. What is the Korean American or the Korean immigrant population in California, United States? Is his case receiving a lot of attention? Are people generally in favor of Mr. Byun? Are they pulling for him, or is it split along political lines? And those who favored Moon within the United States, the Koreans in the United States, those who favored Moon, are they against Mr. Byun? And those who favored Park Geun-hye and so forth, are they supporting him? That's one question. And the second one, I think we lost Mr. Byun. I think we might have lost him. See if he signs back in. There he goes.
그래서 빨리 퇴근을 먹으러 나왔으면 됐는데 체력이 떨어졌어.
I think he'll be
소리가
back.
나지.
Looks like he's back. I can
Mhm.
hear. Oh, there you are, Mr. Byun. Well, welcome back. All right.
안 들렸어.
All right. Very good to see. I'm glad we're back online.
요약해줘.
I'll let you go. This will be the last set of questions. I was asking about the Koreans in the United States, whether they were supporting you, and the second question is about your application, I believe, or your plan to apply for political asylum. As you know, Yoon Seok-yeol and the former Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida Fumio, they have been joined at the hip with Washington. They were at the Camp David summit, for example, and Washington has worked very, very closely with Yoon and former Prime Minister Kishida in East Asia. If you, as a political opponent, adversary of Yoon Seok-yeol, if you apply for political asylum in the United States, Washington is in a difficult political situation. The same as, for example, with dissidents from China, whereas Washington might want to support dissidents from China, but they will choose the relationship with China over the individual dissident. What do you think about that? your chances of political asylum, given that Washington and the Yoon administration are working so closely together in East Asia? Those 2 points.
네, 저 마지막으로 두 가지 질문을 드리고 싶은데요. 첫 번째는 지금 그 LA 지역에서 활동을 하고 계시는 것 같은데 거기에 이제 그 한국계 커뮤니티와도 이제 같이 활동을 하고 계시는 것 같은데 그쪽 반응은 좀 어떤지 가 첫 번째 질문이고요. 혹시 두 번째까지 하고 갈까요?
먼저 할게요.
네.
제가 오늘 그 망명선언 기자회견은 한국 레프트 촛불과 같이 했습니다. 음, 반면 한국의 이 보스트키 진영은 저하고 훨씬 가까운데도 제가 윤석열의 범죄를 얘기하니까 공식적 참여하는 것을 좀 꺼리는 부분이 있지만은 사적으로는 도와주면서 여기 한국의 이 보수 커뮤니티는 의뢰 지금 트럼프 당선 운동을 하고 있어요. 근데 저도 한국의 이익을 위해서는 트럼프 당선이 맞다 생각하기 때문에 내일도 이 트럼프 이 좀 지지 행사가 있는데 제가 참여하고 그러니까 윤석열 퇴진 투쟁은 제가 좌파 촛불과 같이 하고 있고 우리 보수하고는 제가 트럼프 당선 운동을 같이 하고 있다. 그래서 요거까지 말씀드릴게요.
Um, so within the U.S., he's working with the primarily with the left wing sort of community.
Interesting.
As you know, he held a rally today in front of the LA consulate, and that was
Right,
with this left wing group.
right.
Um, but he does still work with some conservative groups. But once he raises Yoon Seok-yeol and Yoon Seok-yeol's criminal activity, they're a little reluctant to work together.
Interesting.
Right. But still, these conservatives, Korean American community are supporting Trump for presidency,
Right,
and they're holding rallies in advocacy for Trump.
right.
So he's joining those rallies. Because Byun believes that Trump will be a better choice among the two for South Korea. So he'll be joining um, the conservative group for Trump rally.
One quick follow-up question, if I may, about that. That Mr. Buna is working with more left-wing groups in the United States. I wanted to ask him if he doesn't mind telling us how he views himself politically. I imagine that 8 years ago, he might have considered himself a conservative, a South Korean conservative. Have his political views changed? Does he see himself differently? Has he become disillusioned with the conservatives in South Korea?
혹시 그 변 대표님의 정치 성향에 대해서 만약 그 물어볼 수 있으면 물어보고 싶은데요. 그러니까 혹시 변화가 있었나요? 변 대표님께서도 예전엔 보수였던 것 같은데.
없습니다. 저는 좀 이 컨저버티즘, 보수주의자라고 한국의 보수주의자라고 얘기할 수 있습니다. 그리고 이 제 이념대에서는 뭐 박근혜 탄핵 전후로도 제가 지금까지도 바뀐 게 없습니다.
He considers himself as conservative, right-wing conservative, and his position hasn't really changed over time,
Interesting.
even after and before Park Geun-hye's scandal.
Interesting. He's a man of principle. I admire that very much. And then the last question about
Right.
Washington, his chances about
그
asylum.
미국에서 그 정치적 만명을 신청하실 계획이 있으시다고 하셨는데 아무래도 그 정부 간에 이제 한미일이 현재 그 굉장히 그 뭐라 그래야 되죠? 치밀하게 이렇게 이 삼각 동맹을 형성하고 있는데
음.
과연 미국에서 좀 이거를 민감하게 받아들여지지 않을까 좀 우려가 되는데요. 만명에 대해서는 가능성이 있다고 혹시 보시나요?
그 사례가 굉장히 많아요. 한국의 이 농객들이 미국으로 망명한 사례가 굉장히 많아서 제 사례로 보면은 이 거짓 잘못 허위 보도를 했다가 구속될 위기에 직망해서 100% 이 확정을 시킨 상태에서의 진실 보도이기 때문에 망명 자체를 신청해서 받아들여지는 거는 이쪽의 미국 쪽의 이 변호사들도 전혀 문제 없다 그거는. 근데 저는 망명 자체가 목적이 아니라 쉽지 않은 문제지만은 막는 한국에 들어가서 마무리할 생각도 있다.
Kenji, I think you're on mute, Kenji. I think you might have.
그 저기 마지막 부분에 조금 끊겨가지고요. 인터넷 그 커넥션이 좀 끊겼는데 이제 그 조건부로 만명 선언을 하셨다는 건가요?
네, 그렇죠. 그러면은 들어가서 하겠다. 한국에 들어가서 밝히겠다. 그러니까 망명이 목표가 아니라는 겁니다. 저는
음.
윤석열의 범죄를 공식화하겠다는 거에서 망명은 하나의 수단이고 망명 자체는 신청하면은 뭐 받아들여지는 데는 큰 문제 없다는 제가 자문을 받고 있습니다.
네. Um, so with the political asylum, there are many instances of where South Korean commentators or journalists being approved of a political asylum in the U.S.
Right.
So he's also discussing this with local attorneys, and they are also pretty optimistic about this being approved, should he apply for one. Um, but the ultimate his ultimate goal is not really to seek or to gain political asylum in the US, but what he's doing is he's giving sort of a in a way an ultimatum, right?
I see.
A condition that, you know, give me a fair trial.
Right.
Then I would stand the trial in South Korea. But if that doesn't change, if the current judge who has sort of denied all the witnesses, who has denied even the recording of the trial, um, if the current bench stays the same, that he would, be compelled to seek asylum.
Right. Interesting. The notion of journalists seeking asylum leads me to just one quick follow-up question about, if I might ask, it seems, if I understand correctly, there's a certain reporter for we've lost Mr. Byun again.
I think the connection might be a little
The
bad.
connection seems to be off. I don't know whether to push forward with this one final question, or maybe we can just call it a night. I wanted to ask him about the Jung-ang Ilbo reporter who has apparently been following him around. Don't know if he can speak about that or not.
Okay. Um,
He should come back in just a minute here.
mm. So I just received message that they're staying in a hotel, and their hotel Wi-Fi is very weak
I
and very
see. Okay.
unstable, so maybe they might not be able to come back.
That might be it. Okay, well, if he can't come back in, I was going to give Mr. Byun the last word if he
Mm.
wanted to say anything directly to the viewers. But Kenji, what do you think? If you want to maybe recap the interview, your thoughts about it, and what you think Mr. Byun might be up
Right.
against politically.
So it's to me, it's pretty evident that he's facing a very unfair trial back home, and as he said, all the witnesses that the prior court approved and all the sort of evidentiary investigation that prior court approved were denied under the current judge.
Right.
Um, so, I can understand, and also because the mainstream media in South Korea has not really reported anything on this issue. Over the years. So his options are really limited. Byun's options are really limited. So I can understand why he traveled all the way to the US. And I might also add that some people in South Korea who's opposed to what Byun is doing, and these commentators, they're suggesting that Byun sort of fled to the US, right?
Right.
To avoid being prosecuted or indicted, or being sentenced to jail. But so he had a travel restriction that was placed after he was
Right. Right.
he was his bail was approved, the condition was that he'll be on a travel restriction.
Right.
But somehow the travel restriction was lifted. And this, I think, is an administrative error that this
Interesting.
travel restriction was lifted, because the reason is because there's another reporter who was tried along with Byun Hwang,
Right.
who
Right. Also from Media Watch.
right, from Media Watch.
Right.
His travel restriction is still valid, still there, so he can't travel abroad. But Byun's travel restriction was unexpectedly lifted, so it must have been some sort of an administrative error. So he was able to. Should I ask him the last question?
Yes, if you would, about just his final thoughts, and if he has any, and also if you don't mind asking him about the reporter who's been following him
Right.
around and the possible connections with JTBC and so forth.
아, 저기 변 대표님 시간 괜찮으시면 마지막 질문 한 가지 좀 드리고 싶은데, 지금 현재 미국 현지에서도 혹시 언론인이나 그 기자가 이렇게 좀 이
네.
리포트를 하고 있는 사람이 계시는지,
음.
그리고 그 앞으로 좀
오늘 망명 신청을 해서 아마 우리가 이제 어, 영문 자료로 아마 돌릴 테니까 이제부터 우리가 이제 미국 지금까지는 뭐 오늘부터 이제 미국 언론 접촉 들어간다고 봅니다.
그 미국에 있는 예를 들어서 뭐 좀 한인 신문이나 이쪽에서도 좀 관심 갖고 있는
한인
건가요?
매체들은 제가 통화는 자주 하고 있는데 이 미국 한인 매체들은 거의 정보 제공 서비스가 많아가지고 좀 시간이 걸릴 것 같아요. 이 기사가 나가는 거에 대해서는.
어,
계속 뭐 접촉하고 있다.
저기 그 모근 교수님이 이제 들은 바로는 이제 미주 저기 중앙일보인가요? 그쪽에서도 기자가 이렇게 리포트를 하고 계신다는 것 같은데, 그 혹시
미주
그쪽,
중앙일보?
네, 그
어,
그쪽
이
기자인가요?
미주 중앙일보나 뭐 미주 한국일보는 뭐 전혀 뭐 그 제도권으로 움직이는 거 없고 원용석 기자라고 이 미국 정치 다루는 그 기자하고는 제가 만나서 아마 유튜브로 공동 방송을 할 겁니다. 원용석 기자하고.
아, 그분은 이제 미주 중앙일보하고는 이제 관계가 이제 없는 분인 거죠, 지금은.
사표 쓰고 나왔기 때문에 이제 독립 유튜버니까.
어, 이제 아마 그 모건 교수가 물어보는 거는 그런 것 같아요. 그 혹시 원래 이제 중앙일보 계열에 계시던 분이라서 좀 문제가 되는 게 아닌가, 혹시 그쪽.
전혀 상관없는 게
Yeah. So he doesn't think that there's any issue with the reporter.
It's
He
just a
is also
reporter,
right.
just
He's
standard
no
reporter.
longer associated with the reporter who used to work for the US version of 중앙일보.
I see.
He quit there a couple years ago. He now is an independent reporter who runs a YouTube channel.
Mhm.
So he Byan is planning to appear on his YouTube
Oh, I
channel.
see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Mr. Byun and Mr. Yoshida, thank you very much for your time and your effort. I know it's in the middle of a very difficult circumstance for Mr. Byun. I really appreciate your being here, sir, and telling your story, not just your story, but the story of South Korean politics, which affects the whole world. I appreciate it very much. And I know the internet connection is not so great, but I wanted to give you the last word. If you have anything that I left out or anything you wanted to tell the world about your case, about South Korean politics, please let us know.
그 혹시 마지막으로 좀 그 질문 못 드린 점이나 어떻게 변 대표님께서 마지막으로 하시고 싶은 말씀 있으시면은.
Might be on mute, I think. Having a little trouble hearing the
소리가 안 나오고 있는 것 같은데요.
I think it's still on mute, I believe.
어디.
There we go.
들리나요?
Yes.
오케이.
네.
예. 이거는 태블릿이라는 것은 과학적 이 문제이기 때문에 의혹제기가 아니라 이건 과학적으로 이 범죄 입증이 끝난 사건입니다. 끝난 사건. 그래서 이게 지금 이 명백히 밝혀진 범죄 행위가 대한민국 내에서 사법 시스템으로 정리가 안 된다는 거는 정말 대한민국의 심각한 위기다. 그래서 다른 무슨 뭐 사례처럼 언론인이 의혹 제기하다가 말이 막히고 이게 아니고 범죄를 완전히 밝혔는데 그 밝힌 사람을 감옥에 집어넣으려는 아주 심각한 상황이라는 걸 좀 정확히 좀 이해해 줬으면 좋겠다는.
So this whole tablet issue, this is scientifically proven because there are forensic evidences to suggest that the tablet PC in question was doctored and rigged. So even with this sort of evidence, if the court, if the legal system in South Korea can't sort of indict, the criminal,
Right.
this is a serious problem in South Korea. And this isn't some sort of journalist, being suspicious of certain issue, right? It's not a suspicion anymore. It's a proven fact that the tablet was, in fact, manipulated. So Byun hopes that the viewers would understand that this is quite a serious issue.
And the criminal in this case is none other than the current president of South Korea and possibly others on his prosecution team from 8 years ago.
그 여기서 이제 말하자면 범죄자는 그 당시 이제 태블릿을 조작했던 이제 윤석열과 그 팀원이라고 할 수 있는 건가요?
예.
Yes, that's correct.
특검
Wow.
팀 전체. 예.
Wow. Well, I think that this may be, I don't know for sure, but this may be one of the first interviews in English with Mr. Byun. I'm honored to have been part of it. And I encourage people to check out Mr. Yoshida's reporting on this at Japan Forward. Maybe we can put some of those links in the description. And if there's anything else you'd like to share with the audience, please send some links and we'll do that as well. Mr. Byun, thank you very much. Good luck, sir. There are a lot of people pulling for you, and we're hoping for the best for South Korea too. Thank you so much.
네. 오늘 시간 내주셔서 감사합니다. I think he might be disconnected again.
Might be disconnected.
So,
Okay. Thank you very much, Kenji, and thank you everybody for listening to this very important interview about South Korean politics. Thank you.